Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Tuesday, January 14th, 2025, and today we're talking about what we really lost when we stopped using fire as a tool. Does sweet corn ruin popcorn? And soil block versus the world of seed starting. So let's do it. All right. Well, happy Tuesday, everyone. It's cold here. No surprises there. The ice is still somewhat on everything, but at least it's not snowing anymore and the kids are in school and I am getting to work, in the tunnels a little bit and get all that squared away. So that's all good. Feeling pretty good about that. Not much to report. Still winter, but yesterday I mentioned that I was going to get into soil blocks versus other means of starting seedlings, and I figured why not a Tuesday? So let's start there. All right. In terms of market gardeners, there are three main types of seed starting trays. Four if you count the paper pot, but let's leave that for its own segment another time because it's not just a seed starting mechanism, but a pricey planting system as well. And you can just watch the video Jackson shot about that recently, which I will link in the show notes. The three main ones are cell trays, the plastic trays you find relatively cheaply that just need soil to mix to fill them. Wind strips, which are similar to cell trays, but are more robust and have little like slits on the side to allow for air pruning, something I will explain presently. And then soil blocks. I learned how to farm using soil blocks, so my preference is soil blocks, but I have used all three and still use a handful of wind strips for certain applications. Let's talk about what soil blocks are to start and how they're made, because that will make it easier to compare them to the others. For soil blocks, you have to start with a decent soil mix. Honestly, you need to start with a decent soil mix for all of them, but with soil blocks, it's essential so that the mix actually holds together. I will say I've never tried a professional mix that didn't hold together, and all of the ones that I made myself all held together. It's not that hard to get a good mix for soil blocking. Often when people are having a bad time with soil blocking, they are just not using enough water in the mix to start or are using too much to moisten the mixture. Getting the right amount is tricky, but effectively you should be able to easily squeeze the water out of the mix, but it shouldn't fall out of your hand like mush. Anyway, when you mix that mix together and you compress it together with a soil blocking tool, it forms little blocks of soil with a dibble in the middle where you can place the seed. You usually can do this on a 10 by 20 inch tray that you can either build or buy from places like Johnny Selected Seeds. Blocks use a lot of soil mix and they are very heavy. So you do need a decently stable thing to put them on. And physically, soil blocks are very demanding and slower to make depending on which blocker you use. But for us, we consider them part of our fertility management. So it's worth it. Imagine that making soil blocks is part of your composting regimen, and then it doesn't feel like quite as much work when you're actually making the blocks. Each tray takes me about 90 seconds or less to make, so it's not a big deal for me. If I was doing thousands and thousands of trays, well, actually, they make soil blocking machines, so I'd probably just buy one of those, but I wouldn't be able to really do that by hand. That would be quite a lot of work. In the season, we probably do several hundred trays, but not thousands. But I'm digressing. The advantage of cell trays, by contrast, is that they're fast to fill up and fast to seed, especially with a vacuum seeder or drop seeder. Soil blocks do not yet have a great method for drop seeding or vacuum seeding, though I am hopeful Swift Blocker will make one at some point. Those same attributes apply to the wind strips, but the wind strips, unlike cell trays, offer some amount of air pruning, meaning they have little slots in the sides that stop the roots from endlessly circling around the root ball and wearing the plant out. For both wind strips and cells, you also have to think about popping, literally popping the plugs out, whereas with soil blocks, you can just pull them off the tray. There's no popping needed. Popping adds a whole other step to the process. Though with the right tool, a popper, it's not that bad. One place cell trays and wind strips definitely are better than soil blocks is that they are easier to carry around. I have a system for carrying 3 trays of soil blocks at once, but any more than that, and it's not really possible without crushing the plants. I mean, I usually just throw them all in my wheelbarrow anyway to take them to the field, so it's not a big issue I run into a lot, but there are definitely times when I need to carry more than I can carry, and it requires multiple trips. So, that's an advantage to cell trays is you can easily carry 4 of those with 2 in each hand. Roots do touch in soil blocks more than others, but that's really only a problem with certain crops like cucurbits. So for those, I use the wind strips. People ask if the blocks all melt together, and they do not. I do a demo every year where I make a fresh soil block and I toss it in the air immediately and water it immediately to demonstrate. Now, you don't want to like heavy shower them right off the bat, but if you miss them lightly for a day, you're good to go. The water's not going to like beat them down too badly. Also, there is not a dangerous level of compaction so long as you are using a good mix with a sufficient aeration element and keeping them adequately moist. They seem to require more water than cells, the soil blocks do, but I find the wind strips dry out faster than both of those with overhead watering. All of those work fine with bottom watering, but if you're just overhead watering, soil blocks need a little bit more water than the other two. Wind strips can dry out very easily though. And it's sometimes hard to even notice because it's underneath where all those little slats are. Or slots or slits. I don't know what to call them. Soil blocks also need less hardening off in my experience before you put them out into the soil. Though hardening off is still a good idea no matter how you start your plants if you can. Anyway, there's more I can say, but this is going to be a long show already, so I'll save it for later, or maybe just get all your questions in about soil blocks and I'll try and bust them out on Friday. The thing that everyone will learn about farming is that there is no one perfect system or tool. There are just systems that work for you. For me, I've been soil blocking for nearly 16 years and it works great. I love it. I've always loved it. I like the quality of the plants and adding so much mixture to the garden every season to improve the soil. Anyway, what do you all use? Let me know. Otherwise, up next, I get to talk more about popcorn because this job rules sometimes. BRB. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Peaceful Heritage Nursery. If you're looking for hardy and resilient fruit trees, berry plants, or pawpaw trees, then check out Peaceful Heritage Nursery. Peaceful Heritage Nursery LLC is a mail-order nursery shipping premium quality fruit trees and berry plants across the USA. They specialize in resilient, non-GMO plant genetics for small growers. Their diverse selection includes berries, cold hardy figs, passion fruit, gumi, mulberry, and much more. They're famous for their diverse selection of premium quality grafted pawpaw trees. 5-star Google ratings and customer testimonials attest to their commitment to excellence in quality and service. Find them at peacefulheritage.com and join their mailing list. Once again, find them at peacefulheritage.com. Use the promo code NOTILL, all caps, one word, for 10% off your first order. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this content, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/notillgrowers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to those Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member Lamb's Quarters Farm, who writes, quote, "Hey Jesse, enjoyed your previous discussion on popcorn growing for the family. We are big popcorn eaters too, and I spend a fortune on organic popcorn, so thinking of growing it for the family and possibly market, but the interweb says you best not grow popcorn if you grow sweet corn, which I do, because the cross-pollinating will ruin the flavors. Wondering if you have any experience or advice here. I'm considering growing the two separated by a distance of about 300 feet, where there is also a hill separating the two crops. I could also do something like run a fence between the two and grow some vining crops like beans. Just thinking of blocking the pollen, if that is even possible. Thanks." End quote. Okay, so great questions there, Lamb's Quarters Farm, which Lamb's Quarters also happens to be one of my favorite garden weeds for eating and throwing in salads. So shouts to that. I mean, as long as you can keep the Lamb's Quarters under control, that is. Otherwise, it becomes less of a favorite when it's taking over your garden. Anyway, so yes, this is a thing where popcorn and sweet corn can cross-pollinate, potentially with negative effects. And in fact, it works both ways. I have had problems in the past with my popcorn that I assume has to do with cross-pollination because I too grow both. So first, popcorn cross-pollination can make sweet corn tougher and more starchy, potentially also causing some discoloration of the kernels. Sweet corn can affect not only the quality and effectiveness of the popcorn, but the texture and size. Also, while we're on the subject of planting, multiple varieties of sweet corn can also yield some wonky results. A standard sweet corn, for instance, could potentially bring down the sweetness of a super sweet variety. Also, the potential for color contamination is possible too among sweet corns. It seems that white sweet corn varieties will not affect yellow or bicolor, but yellow will affect white varieties of sweet corn and even make yellow varieties more yellow. So what do we do about that? Well, the recommendation for starchy types of corn, like popcorn and dent corn, is to separate them by 300 yards, so 900 feet, so that they don't cross-pollinate or cross-pollinate as much. For different types of sweet corns, 300 feet is acceptable. So it sounds like you may want to find more distance than just 300 feet, but you can also stagger your days to maturity, which is what I've mostly done here, for instance, and perhaps this is just the benefit of being in a long season climate here in Kentucky, Zone 6B. But what I do is I start my 70-day sweet corn 2 weeks before my 90-day popcorn, usually in trays. And then I plant that sweet corn out while the popcorn sort of gets started in the greenhouse. So the flowers on the sweet corn should largely be exhausted of pollen by the time the popcorn starts putting out its silks. This past year, my popcorn is a little crunchy, and I suspect that this is due to poor timing on my end and not enough separation between the popcorn and the sweet corn, which were planted a little closer together in terms of both timing and physically. They were like about 100 feet apart. The sweet corn had done most of its pollination as far as I could tell, but obviously I still think there was some contamination there. And I know you didn't ask this, but someone is no doubt thinking it, because I did a long time ago. Sweet corn will not make popcorn sweet, unfortunately, though that would be rad. Like if I could grow ready to pop caramel corn, that would be a killer winter market product. At least at this moment, however, no such thing exists. Especially if your plan is to save the popcorn seed, then isolation will be critical. But if your timing is good, you may have a small amount of cross-pollination, but it likely won't be enough to affect the other popcorn. So anyway, separate them by as much as you can and keep the timing as staggered as possible while still allowing for both crops to reach full maturity. And sure, a few pollen blockers wouldn't hurt. Also, plant both crops in thick blocks so that the self-pollination is adequate. A single row of corn, for instance, isn't enough for great pollination. So you really need 4 or 5 row blocks to get sufficient pollination, or at least 3 rows on a 30-inch bed, but with 2 beds next to each other. Also, if you are near large corn plantings, well, the amount of pollen coming off of those will be brutal, but you can perhaps reduce the risk of contamination by planting tall physical borders and staggering your plantings. Even ask the farmer when they expect their corn to tassel, like they will likely have a good idea of that. Otherwise, I hope that's helpful. I freaking love corn in all of its forms. So although it's not even close to the top 20 most profitable crops, it's certainly high up there in terms of importance to me, to the family, to dinner. Love corn, cornbread, sweet corn, all the things. So expect more corn talk from me in the future. Great question, and we're going to take a quick break. Up next, fighting fire with fire. It's complicated. BRB. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Harnwah Greenhouses. Harnwah Greenhouses has pioneered controlled environment agriculture since 1965, partnering with market gardeners and farmers across North America to deliver turnkey greenhouse solutions. Their unwavering mission is to support growers' success through innovation and expertise in design, manufacturing, and installation. Harnwah Greenhouses are engineered to withstand high wind and snow loads, providing optimal brightness, increased yields, rapid ROI, and long-lasting durability. With over 20,000 projects completed, they are more than a manufacturer. They are a trusted partner. Their structures foster sustainable, energy-efficient ecosystems that drive profitable, resilient agriculture. In 2025, Harnwah is introducing a new low-tech, high-tunnel model starting at just $2 per square foot, offering open field growers an accessible entry into controlled environment agriculture. Harnwah Greenhouses, leading the way in turnkey solutions for local growers. Learn more at harnwah.com. That's HARNOIS.com. All right, back to the show. So with the fires in Los Angeles and just fires all over the world these last few years, fire has been on my mind a lot lately. But also, fire has been on my mind a lot always. I remember when I was just a wee little nerd in Colorado, watching in awe and excitement somewhat as a fire swept through the nearby foothills behind our house. Then I remember the look of fear on the faces of the adults around me, and what a whiplash of emotions it was to realize our homes were in actual danger. And that same whiplash persists today when I'm around fire. I love campfires. I love candles. I can stare at a fire for hours, partially in awe, partially in distrust. But it isn't just a fascination. It feels pretty deep and visceral. The thing is, we all have a very ancient relationship to fire. All of us, pretty much no matter where our ancestry is from the Pyrenees Mountains to Africa to indigenous America, the Middle East, to Aboriginal Australia, Japan, all over the planet, history was flush with indigenous cultures utilizing fire as a hunting tool, as an agricultural tool, as land management tool, as a tool against fire itself. Ever since there has been lightning and dry carbon, there has been fire, and nature, with the help of humans, spent millennia evolving and adapting to the whims and destruction of fire, where, with more sunlight available, a lightly mulched surface, and habitat for microbes in the form of ash and charcoal, forests and hunting grounds could bounce back even better more often than not after fire tore through them. So ubiquitous was fire for thousands of years that there are seeds that evolved to require fire to germinate, called pyrophilic, along with trees and plants that are fire tolerant. This week I've been reading a book called An Indigenous People's History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. I'll link that in the show notes. The book is really well done, albeit profoundly sad, with its primary focus on the cruel brutality of European settlers and squatters. But the author discusses what settlers, colonists discovered when they arrived in America. And I'll quote the text here, quote, "In the Northeast, indigenous farmers always carried flints. One English observer in 1637 noted that they used the flints to set fire of the country in all places where they come. They used torches for night hunting and rings of flame to encircle animals to kill. Rather than domesticating animals for hides and meat, indigenous communities created havens to attract elk, deer, bear, and other game. They burned the undergrowth and forests so that the young grasses and other ground cover that sprouted the following spring would entice greater numbers of herbivores and the predators that fed on them, which would sustain the people who ate them both." End quote. I mean, some of the settlers' accounts describe the eastern forests like European parks, where they could drive full carriages and unfortunately whole armies through them without any trouble. Now, and this is going to seem a little off topic, but bear with me. I have a long-held disdain for colonialism, not just for what my family likely did to other people, but also what was likely done at some point in history to my own family. At some point in time, someone likely forced my ancestors, and pretty much everyone's, from some diverse, rich commons or tribal lands, mine likely somewhere in Europe, that we'd been cultivating for thousands of years, forcing us then to come back and work on that land for free or low wages, before sending us to America to go do that same thing to other indigenous people here. And I frankly really, really resent that hundreds of years ago, my family lost some ecological version of what I can only dream of building today. And I hate the fact that we, by force, carried that same mentality to the people and land here. Colonists and American settlers didn't see the value in fire. It was even outlawed in many areas to, as the Spanish once put it, quote, "uproot this very harmful practice of setting fire to pasture land," end quote. And therefore, societies were set up without fire in mind, including modern-day America. The thing is, when you think in terms of the private property ownership that is inherent in colonization, employing a land management tool like fire that does not always respect land deeds is practically inconceivable to most people. However, and I'm not even close to the first person to point any of this out, when we don't consistently and thoughtfully manage dry understory, we effectively collect fuel and fodder for bigger, badder fires, like what we're seeing in LA and like what we've been seeing through the West and elsewhere. There are policies that support prescribed burns, to be sure. There are smart and organized groups that do them legally, including indigenous people who, albeit on an entirely inadequate scale, still sometimes get to practice traditional controlled burns today. And to be sure, fire is as culturally significant as it is practical. Some groups and officials even rightfully consult and work with the indigenous groups in those areas on burns, as they should, for the cultural importance of fires to tribes, but also that indigenous knowledge of how to use them properly and safely. To protect larger areas from forest fires, the U.S. Forest Service intentionally burns over 1 million acres per year. But it's hard to pick and choose where fire is used and where it isn't, especially in dry climates, because fire is fire. and can get out, making it really difficult to manage some land with fire and some without it. Fire is just going to chase the fuel, the dry carbon, regardless of fence borders paid for and registered by your county clerk. In 2022, there was a legal prescribed burn from the U.S. Forest Service that got loose and caused the biggest wildfire in New Mexico's recorded history. That same year, a federal official overseeing a prescribed burn, which burned some fences and about 20 acres in Oregon of someone else's property, that person was arrested, a government official, for trying to save people. Anyway, simultaneously, these millions of acres of prescribed burns have likely saved countless lives in structures and forests from massive unintentional wildfires. Again, the idea that we can pick and choose our relationship with fire is it's misguided and dangerous. It's either prescribed burns or time bombs. And the more prescribed burns, the fewer that can get out, the fewer time bombs. Anyway, I love to keep exploring this idea of prescribed burns and land management, if you will permit me in the future, because, well, we can reduce the power of these fires, support the tribes for whom prescribed burns are not only a part of their cultures, but also tribes who have been doing this for thousands of years and passing down that knowledge. And also a relationship to fire is a relationship that we all need to perhaps, oh dear, forgive me for this word, but we all need to rekindle. Anyway, I don't live in the West where you all are living these conversations. So I look forward to hearing your thoughts and perspectives, and of course, sending love to LA and hoping we can devise better fire management policies and strategies in the future that prevent people from losing their homes and their livelihoods and lives. It's heartbreaking, and I'm sorry for it. Okay, I think I'm going to end it there for this Tuesday. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and the team at Notill Growers. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or the Seed Farmer at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or sign up in the month of January, you get a shout out in the show. So big shout outs today to Zach B and Tad Ward. Zach B and Tad Ward. So Zach and Tad are a duo that they were driving a food truck across the United States, stopping at farms and having these events, these really cool, events, and biodiesel food truck, naturally. And then boom, it turns out that Star Wars is real, and all of a sudden they are having to fight off the Galactic Empire from taking over the world, which is weirdly easier than you would think, because it turns out they're allergic to American cheese, which, I can relate. Anyway, thanks for watching and or listening. We will see you all tomorrow. Bye.